Welcome to the Apartment Investor Pro podcast, where we talk about how to be a more successful multifamily investor with a focus on using technology to boost your business. And now your host, Todd Heitner.
Welcome to the Apartment Investor Pro podcast, episode 13. Today our topic is keys to multifamily asset management. One of the key aspects of asset management is hiring a good property manager. It can be a challenge to find the right fit for your team. It's important to understand how they can actually increase the value of your asset. So where can you start your search? When might be the time to find a replacement? And what should you look for in a potentially great property manager? Well, today I have Anthony Chara with me. Anthony is a seasoned real estate investor who has owned, partnered on, or syndicated over 2,000 apartment units across the country. Through his website, successclasses.com, he teaches aspiring investors through coaching and workshops about multifamily syndication. Now, today I've asked Anthony to talk in detail about managing your multifamily assets successfully. So here are a few points that we'll discuss. Finding and keeping a property manager who increases revenue. What are some red flags that will help you know that it's time to change your property manager? Tips for increasing profitability by decreasing expenses, and ideas to increase revenue that will also keep your tenants happy. So let's get started. So Anthony, thanks so much for coming on today. Wanted to talk today about asset management, especially managing the property. Once you've got it under contract, managing all of that. So thanks for coming on today. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Todd.
Yeah, great. Let's maybe we'll break this up into sections. Maybe first we could talk about hiring a property manager. So that's always kind of a debate, maybe about should I hire a property manager? Should I try to manage it myself?
Yep.
What do you think about that? What should someone take into consideration?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things that I tend to lean towards is hiring a property manager. So most of the time, as far as hiring one, we generally use the same property manager that's already on the property when we purchase it. It makes it easier for the transition. So we hire them, bring them on board. We give them 6 months or so to prove that they can do what they actually are supposed to be doing. But yeah, sometimes you have to go out and hire a new one. As far as managing the property yourselves, I've heard arguments on both sides. I've heard people say, well, if you do it yourself, right, no one's going to take care of the property as good as you, which is probably true. But it comes down to a matter of time and how much time do you have and how much time do you want to spend managing the property yourself? I didn't get into real estate investing to own a bunch of properties so I could manage them myself and be a property manager. I did it because I'm an investor. And the analogy that I use with people is, how many of you have ever bought a stock? Raise your hand if you ever bought a stock. Well, how many people then that bought a stock then went out the next day and got a job with that company so they could keep an eye on the company, the people running the company, to make sure their stock was performing well, right? You don't do that. Why not? Because you're an investor. So an investor should put their money into a deal and then let the manager take care of it. That's my opinion. But some people agree with me, some people don't. That's fine.
Yeah. And so you mentioned you usually keep the existing management in place. And why is that?
Again, it just makes it easier for the transition. The residents already know that particular property manager. And of course, once we get in there, if we start hearing complaints about the property manager because they're rude or they don't get maintenance requests taken care of quickly enough, then we'll make a change. We'll go out and we'll hire somebody else to replace them.
Okay. Have there been any cases where going into a property, you realize that the property was, the management was the problem and just start off with replacing them, or do you usually try them out for a little while and see if they improve?
We'll definitely interview them, but if we know that the reason the property is having issues is because of the property manager, then we'll just bring in a new one to start with. That's actually pretty rare, though. Most of the time, if we have to hire a brand new property manager as soon as we purchase a property, in one case, it was because the property manager was also the owner of the property, and they weren't going to stick around and manage it once they sold the property. So that was an easy decision.
Yeah.
Another one we were looking to purchase, the owner specifically told us the reason they were selling the property is because they didn't want to fire they couldn't fire the property manager. So we can only assume that maybe it was a family thing And they didn't want to fire the person because that would have been very awkward for them to fire them. So they wanted us to buy the property from them so we could fire them. And that way it could say, hey, it wasn't our fault. Yeah, we sold the property, but we have no control over whether or not they keep you. So,
all right. Well, that's interesting. So then in a situation then where you do need to find a property manager, where would you start then with maybe looking for one?
Well, if we have to hire a new one, the first thing I would do is there's a couple different websites you can go to. There's one called irem.org, irem.org. There's ccim.com. There's also narpm.org. N is in Nancy, RPM, National Association of Rental Property Managers. The other thing that I would do too is I would go to the local apartment association, because then you could meet up with other owners and property managers. And of course, the people that run the apartment association in that area where the property is located. And I would always ask for referrals. So even though I gave you the websites first, I would generally go to the apartment association or other owners first and ask for referrals to other property managers. Because that's usually word of mouth is going to be your best bet. Anybody can advertise on the internet. Anybody can put up a website that says, hey, I'm a property manager. The key is, are they actually going to do what they say they're going to do?
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And so, so let's say you find somebody you're interested in hiring, then what kind of questions would you ask them then to try to find out, is this person going to be a good fit?
Yeah, great question. I actually have about 40 to 50 different questions that I go through with the property manager. And obviously, I'm not going to go through them all today because we don't have time for it. But some of the ones that I like, of course, are I do ask them for references, but I also keep in mind that the people that they're going to give me as references are usually going to be good references anyway. So there's also questions you want to ask those people, but some of the questions you want to ask the property manager are just simple things like, how do you market to find new residents? How do you, what happens if somebody violates the lease, whether it's because they don't pay the rent on time or they're disturbing the neighbors? How do you handle that process? How do you handle the eviction process? What kind of reports am I going to get, and when am I going to get them? How do you handle maintenance situations? What's your threshold for you taking care of maintenance without me intervening? And at what point do you come to me and say, hey, we've got a bigger expense above this dollar amount, and based on that, we need your written approval in order to proceed? The main one that I like, of course, there's also the software that's included. What kind of software do they actually use? Are they using real management software? I've had a few property managers, when I ask them what kind of software they're using, they say, oh, well, we use Excel and QuickBooks. Well, Excel and QuickBooks are not management software. All they are a tool to help you analyze your property a little bit better, and the income and the revenue, or the revenue and expenses from your property. But that doesn't help you be a better manager per se. And it doesn't make it easy for you as the owner to actually understand what's really happening out at the property. They need to use real management software. The biggest question that I ask is at the end of the interview, if the property manager doesn't bring it up, which they should, but if they don't, the one question that I ask them is, if I hire you, how are you going to make me and my investors more money? How are you going to increase the value of this property for us? Unfortunately, there's a lot of managers out there that their idea of property management is, how much money can I make as a property manager off of this client or off of that client? And the only way that they're going to stay employed with us or contracted with us, because technically they're not employees, is if they continue to make us money and take care of the property and keep the renters happy, keep the income coming in, and control the expenses to the best of their ability.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I also asked that question, you asked earlier about how I hire them. Certainly I'm going to go to the references that they give me, and most of them, they're going to be great references. They're going to tell me a lot of great stuff, but I asked them the same question. I'm going to say, okay, how is this property manager increasing the value of the property, increasing the cash flow for you and your investors? Because I want to know from their mouths what their response is. And if their response is, well, they just keep it occupied and they raise the rent $5 every year, it's like, well, okay, that helps a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily increase the value exponentially.
Okay, great. And do you try to find out like if they have experience managing a property of similar size too than as the way you have?
Yeah, it's not just about the size too, it's about the classification, because as you're well aware, Todd, there's A, B, C, and D classification of properties. Well, somebody who's used to managing an A class property and you want to hire them to manage a C class property, chances are they're going to fail. And you might say, well, wait a second, why would they fail? They're already managing an A class property. That's a really nice property. Well, typically in an A class property, the people who are renting those properties, the apartment units, they know that they're supposed to pay their rent on time. It's very rare for one of those property managers to have to go, knock on the door and say, hey, your rent is due. There's a lot more of that happens in C class properties because people want to wait until the last second to pay their rent. And property managers have to be more proactive. They have to go after the residents. They have to potentially work with them on payment plans. And some A-class property owners don't get that. Some of the C-class property or property managers don't get that. Some of the C-class property managers don't understand that you don't have to be as iron-fisted with an A-class property, where you're always going around and bugging and harassing your residents to try and get them to pay on time. Nicely, of course, but it's a completely different animal. So it's not just about the size of the property, but it's also about the classification of the property and what that manager is geared towards managing on a regular basis.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And then what about like their fees? Like what kind of things do you look for with their like management fees and their like late fees, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, so real quick regarding the late fees, one of the things you want to read in your management contract is who gets the late fee. There are some management contracts where the property manager figures, well, if we go out and we're able to get them to pay the rent, then we deserve to get the late fee. I don't necessarily argue that with the property manager. I just want to know who actually gets it, because whether they get $15 or $25 or $50 or whatever it is, in some cases it's $100 or more, I'm fine with them getting and paying them what they're worth and the money that they're earning. The other thing too is regarding their fees. I don't look at necessarily how much they're trying to pay, because here's one of the things that I've heard from some of my students, and I actually dissuade them from doing this, is they'll go in and say, well, the manager was going to charge me 8% and I got them down to 7%, or I got them down to 6%. Well, you have to take into consideration that if they have, let's say 300 units that they're managing and you have a 10, 12 unit building or 100 unit, well, if you have a 100 unit building, it's a completely different story, because you're going to have an on-site manager. And usually your management rate is going to be lower anyway, just because you have an on-site manager. You're not going to be paying 7-8%. You're probably going to be in the 3 to 4 to 5% range. But what they do is they try and talk them down from 8 to 7, and they're like, or 8 to 6. And like, oh, I did a great job. I negotiated it down. And I tell them, it's like, well, so you have 12 units and they manage 300. And let's say they're getting 8% from all those other 288 units, except for your 12. Which ones do you think they're going to fill up first? Those at 8% or yours at 6%? Now, technically what a manager should be doing if they have multiple properties is they should be taking the residents around. If there's a bunch of smaller properties that they manage, take them around and show them a couple different properties and let the resident decide which property they want to move into. But there are some that will push people to a particular direction because they might get a higher percentage. They might get a higher, what's called a leasing fee, right? So at one property, they get, let's say, the full first month's rent, but your property, you negotiated them down to a half month's rent on that first month when they move in. Which one do you think they're going to push first? So I don't necessarily look at what they're charging. I do. But what I'm more concerned about is what's reasonable and customary in that location, because not every city or property management firm, from coast to coast, is going to charge the same amount, whether it's a percentage or a fee to lease the unit or a fee to release the unit. So a year down the road, when somebody signs a new lease, what kind of fee do they get then? Is it any fee? Is it $50? Is it $100? Is it $200? Is it another half month's rent? So I want to see, when I interview property managers, I want them to tell me. I'm not going to argue with them about what their fees are, because they're worth it. A property manager will make you or break you very, very quickly. And if you're trying to nickel and dime them, they're going to try and make up for it some way.
Yeah, so you want to kind of align your interests then, theirs and yours, and make sure that there's incentive to them for them to do a good job then. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yep.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Um, so then do you, like, if you're trying to find a property manager, do you usually go through a few, or how many do you usually would you interview before deciding on one?
Yeah. We interview a minimum of 3. And if we don't find at least 2 good ones in the 3, then we'll interview 4 or 5. We want to make sure that we have a good mix of people, not just to pick from today, but we've had a couple of properties, matter of fact, 2 in particular, that over a 3 to 5 year period, we've had to replace the manager multiple times. Matter of fact, we're on our 3rd property manager in both of those cases. Because the first 2, they interviewed great. They said all the right things. They checked all the right boxes. The problem is that when we literally gave them the keys to manage the property, they didn't do what they said they were going to do. They didn't make us money. As a matter of fact, they cost us a lot of money because they didn't either put good residents in, or they were spending like crazy, any number of things.
And then when you're meeting with them, are there certain documents you would want to see from the manager?
Yeah, I always want to see what kind of reports they're going to be giving us, and that a lot of the software I'm very familiar with. So if they just tell me that they use like Rent Manager software or AppFolio, we also use Buildium. We also use one called OneSite. So I'm pretty familiar with the report. So if they tell me the types of report or the software that they have, I may not even ask them to see the reports, but I am going to ask them how often do they actually give their owners the reports. And you should be getting the reports once a month.
All right.
If it's a software I'm not familiar with, then I'm absolutely going to ask them for an example of a profit and loss statement. Some people call it a T12. So the T12, right? It's a trailing 12. So it's the trailing 12 months. I want the trailing 12. I want a balance sheet, and I want a cash flow report and a rent roll. So those are the main 4 that I want to see to start with, to see that the software can actually provide me with the data that I need to look at to make sure the property is performing.
Okay, that's excellent. So now let's move into like once you've hired someone, you've decided on them, what kind of expectations you would have for them, and how to basically know whether they're doing a good job or not. So you mentioned that you typically will keep the existing property manager in place, but let's say in a situation where you do need to bring in somebody new, what kind of effect would that typically have on the property and the tenants?
It's really going to depend on why we're getting rid of the property manager. If the property manager was basically doing a okay job of taking care of the tenants, but they were spending way too much money, which we had one in particular that even though the contract that we had with him said he was limited to spending this amount of money for all expenses, 1 month he spent more than that on just one rehab for a single or a 1-bedroom unit. And it's like, you got to be kidding me, right? He didn't even bother to get it in writing. He didn't bother to talk to us about it. He just did that. Well, the residents, of course, seemed to like him because he was spending money like crazy. Well, you have to have a balance between income and expenses. It's not an unlimited checkbook. It's not a bottomless pit that you could just go to and keep pulling money out of to throw it back into the property. You have to be smart about how you spend your money and when you spend your money. Most of the time, the residents, if the manager's doing okay with the residents and we change them to somebody else, they're not really going to care or probably even notice it. The biggest is when we do get complaints from the residents because we've had managers that were rude, they would treat them poorly. And of course, once you replace them, if somebody else comes in and they're jovial and they're really happy to be there, you're going to get a lot of people that come back and say, oh my God, I'm so glad you got rid of that other person. It's so nice to be able to walk into the office and they're actually glad to see you. So that's about the only time that the residents are going to be happy about it. Of course, it could also backfire where you hire somebody because you think they're great, and they are, but then they don't take care of the residents at all. They might be happy and jovial, but somebody starts complaining because they've had a clogged toilet for 3 days and they can't get the manager to get somebody out there to take care of the toilet. That's an issue. So you have to be careful. You also have to have open communication with your residents as well. And so occasionally what we'll do is we'll send out something like a survey monkey thing to the residents and say, hey, this is anonymous. We're the ownership. We want to know what's going on with the property. So that way we can keep an eye on what's going on from the residents' perspective as well as the managers.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Have you found things from that maybe weren't aware of, or anything surprising from those reports?
Yeah, we actually did one of our managers did one a few years ago on a property that we owned in Texas. And we basically, one of the questions we asked them is if you could do anything we actually had some pretty good residents, and we had very good occupancy. We were in the 94, 95, 96% range pretty much consistently with the property. So we were really happy with it, but you can always make your residents happier or do something to get them to stay longer, right? You can have happy residents that just decide to move because they want a newer place or a nicer place or different location. So the manager sent out a survey to the residents and said, hey, if there was anything you could change on the property, what would you change? And we were actually a little bit surprised with that. Actually, with one of the things I was surprised with the other two, not so much, because I had been trying to get my partner to actually upgrade some of the appliances in the property. This was a B-class property, and we still had appliances that were avocado green and harvest gold. And so these things were 40 years old. And it's like, look, we need to start replacing some of these things. It's like, our residents don't care. Well, that was the second thing on the list of what they would like to see changed in the property is upgraded appliances, or at least newer appliances. The first thing that actually caught us by surprise was this was a property that was near a college, and they specialized in nursing. So we had a higher than normal occupancy of young ladies at the property because they were getting their nursing degrees. And one of the things that came back was that even though there had never been a problem at the property, they just didn't feel comfortable walking from their car to their front door at nighttime because there were too many dark areas around where there were shadows or bushes that weren't lit up. And we're like, wow, never even thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we spent about $2,000 per building and went out. Even the old halogen lights that were up, we took all those down, put up the new LED lights because they use a lot less electricity. They're not nearly as hot, and just lit the place up. And of course, a lot of the ladies came in afterwards and said, oh my God, thank you so much for doing that. That's great. Now we can see where we're going. I don't feel, I'm not as fearful anymore or nervous trying to get to my front door. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And you don't know that unless you ask your residents what they think you should do.
Right. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yep.
And so then what are some things you would look for with the property manager to know that they're doing a good job? Like what kind of things would you?
Well, so, one of the things is obvious. What kind of income and expenses do you have on the property? Are you making the right numbers? Are you hitting your budget? Do you have enough revenue coming in, or the revenue that you're supposed to have coming in? If they are spending money, what are they spending on? Is it actually going to improve the property? Is it going to help retention? Is it going to help us raise the rent? What's the plan with that? And of course, the other big thing too with managers is a good manager should actually create or help you create a budget for your property. And we actually had the one that I talked about earlier that overspent like crazy. We asked him to help us create a budget for this property that we had in Pennsylvania. And his response was literally, budget. You're the owner. We tell you how much money we need to take care of stuff, and you just send it to us. It's like, dude, this is a business. I know a lot of people say that apartments are real estate. No, it's not. Apartments are a business. You're buying a business that generates a stream of income. And just like any other business, when you go down to Walmart and Joe's Crab Shack and all these other businesses that you live near, they have budgets. They have budgets for payroll, for repairs, for taxes, all the stuff that goes along with it. And even expectations for revenue. And you need to have a budget in order to know that you're on track, right? If you don't have a budget, you can't keep score. And if you can't keep score, how do you know if you're winning or losing?
Yeah, good point. Yeah. And then, so like how do you balance like how hands-on or how hands-off you should be with that, and like kind of letting the manager do their job, not micromanaging, but also not stepping back too far from that?
Yeah, great question. It really comes down to whether or not they're performing. And we do speak to our managers. At least if things are going well, we do have a conversation with the managers once a month, at least. There's other emails that might go back and forth, but we generally have a scheduled conference call or webinar at least once a month just to make sure that everything's on track. Because I don't want to just read in a report what's going on. I want them to tell me that they had to overspend on something that particular month for a reason, maybe show me pictures of it so I can get an idea of it. If it happens every so often, it's not a big deal. Things do come up that aren't in the budget that have to be taken into account. But I want to hear that directly from them. If things aren't going well, or when we first buy a property, we're going to have a lot more communications with the manager. We might meet with them every couple of days or once a week just to make sure things are going well, things are on track. What kind of feedback are you getting from the residents because of the changeover? It's amazing how many people in a C-class property, when the ownership changes, people just leave. They just vanish. And, we've always thought the reason was because they thought the rent was going to go up, but we actually, on a different property that we bought down in Texas, that's actually what happened. The residents came up to the manager that we left on site, and we left her because she has a really great rapport. As a matter of fact, I think it's like 5-6 years now. She's still the manager. She's doing a great job. And a couple of residents came up to her and said, yeah, well, we're leaving. And she looked at him and said, well, you still have time left on your lease. What do you mean you're leaving? I go, well, the ownership changed. Okay, so the ownership changed. So why are you leaving? Well, because the rent's going to go up. Well, she had to explain to them, well, I don't know if the rent's going to go up or not. But even if the rent did go up, it can't go up until your lease renews. And two of the residents looked at her and said, oh, well, okay, right. So they might have had 6 or 8 or 10 months left on their lease, and they're ready to go now because they think the rent's going to go up. She had to explain to them, even though it's in the lease, that the rent can't be raised until their current lease expires or renews. And so two of them said, oh, okay, we'll stay. And the other two said, yeah, we don't care. It's going to go up, so we're just going to leave now. Amazing what people will do.
Yeah, just assuming. Okay. And then with the reports you get, what kind of things would you look for in the reports? Let's take a moment to thank our sponsor. When we return, Anthony and I will be discussing tips for increasing profitability by decreasing expenses, some ideas to increase revenue that will also keep your tenants happy, and some red flags that will help you know when it's time to change your property manager. So stay tuned.
Do you have a website that gives you credibility and captures leads? ApartmentInvestorPro.com can help you get a professional website today. Typically, building a professional website can be a real pain, taking thousands of dollars and months of your time. One syndicator said it took him 10 months on his own. Another had to go through 3 different companies before getting something usable. ApartmentInvestorPro.com makes it quick and painless. All the design and content is already created. With 15 years of experience building websites for investors, ApartmentInvestorPro.com gives you peace of mind and lets you focus your time on finding deals and investors. These powerful websites capture contact information from your potential investors. You can even automate the follow-up process. No more letting good investor leads fall through the cracks. Save 10% on your website by going to ApartmentInvestorPro.com and using coupon code PODCAST.
And then with the reports you get, what kind of things would you look for in the reports you receive then?
Well, again, it comes back to the budget. Are they on track with the budget? You're always going to see changes, right? Like this. I mean, this is what a budget should look like for income and expenses. But every once in a while, you're going to have income that for whatever reason might drop here, or a particular expense line that all of a sudden jumps up. Well, the question is why? And as an example, let's say insurance. Well, maybe you pay your insurance every 6 months. So it's down at the 0 for 5 months, and then all of a sudden it jumps up for 6 months, and then it's back down at 0 for another 5 months. That explains it, right? That makes sense. So are your overall revenue that month, right, which normally is around here, all of a sudden it drops. That's all explainable. It's understandable. Same thing with property taxes. All of a sudden you're going along, all of a sudden the property taxes are paid, right? So that line goes way up, your income goes way down. It's understandable. There's other things that come up too. So if all of a sudden, as an example, our utility bills spike, well, what happened? Why did this spike this month? And then we find out, oh, because the month before they didn't get the utility bill paid on time. So we have a zero in that month. And then the next month we had 2 months worth of utility bills. So you want to go through every line item by line item to see what's happening on a month in and month out basis to make sure you understand what's going on. Now, all of a sudden, if the utility like water spikes like this, and then it stays up, well, what's going on now? Is it because you just went from winter to spring? And now they turn the sprinklers on or something like that? That's a possibility. Or is it because, hey, maybe we have a leak and we need to get that fixed because, our budget is down here. And now every month we're paying up at this level. We're going to take a hit in the bottom line, and our investors aren't going to be happy. The returns aren't going to be what we want. So every single month we go through the P&L on a line by line basis. And that's what you need to do as an asset manager, is manage your asset. And part of managing the asset is managing the budget, managing the income and the revenue and the expenses, but overseeing the property manager, not doing that job on a day-to-day basis, but overseeing that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Okay. And then like when it comes to things like repairs and maintenance, things like that, do you ever verify the cost of those repairs, like make sure that those are reasonable or in line with what it should cost?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that we require our property managers to do, if we don't have on-site staff, because if we have on-site staff, because it's a large complex, 80 units or more, we don't really have to worry about a lot of the repairs because the on-site staff usually just takes care of it. And then all we pay for are materials because we're already paying them their salary. If we have a smaller property that doesn't have an on-site staff, then we require that property manager to get us 3 quotes. The same manager we fired that said, oh, well, there's no budget. You just give us the money that we tell you we need. We required him. We told him we want 3 quotes. And he's like, no, I gave you a quote. Here's the quote. Just do it. Well, one of his quotes was to have a roof replaced. And the interesting part was this roof was only 3 years old and was still under warranty. And we told him, it's like, the roof's only 3 years old. Why are we replacing the roof? It's 3 years old. Well, because my roofer said it needs to be replaced. It's 3 years old and it's under warranty. Why aren't you having the company come back and repair it under warranty? Well, turned out they were out of business. But we still wanted 2 additional quotes because we didn't have another $26,000 to throw at putting a new roof on because it's under warranty and the original roofer is now out of business and couldn't come back and take care of it under warranty. That unfortunately happened. But the student who was in charge of the project, because he couldn't get the manager to do it, he went out and called a couple of other roofers to come out and give us a quote. And it came back it was about $2,400 to repair the roof rather than just tear the whole thing off and completely redo it. And since we'd only been in the property, I think about 6 months, we just didn't have the cash flow anyway to do a $26,000 roof. So sometimes you do have to jump in. And of course, that manager didn't last much longer. But you have to jump in. And those are the things you want to look for, is you want to find out what they're doing to manage your money. And ultimately what you want them to do is you want them to treat your money as if it was their money and not just assume that it was a bottomless pit that they could just keep taking money out of to line their own pockets, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you ever use property managers that have their own properties, like that maybe own their own apartments? Or we have a couple of times they're not their owners, so they have their own properties. Yes, it's pretty rare, but there are some of them out there that do that. Yes. Okay, I just thought that might have a little bit different mindset if they would treat it like they would their own.
In one case, yes. In another case, no. As a matter of fact, in one property that one of my students owned down in Abilene, he kept getting these really weird expenses. And, he's telling me that he was thinking about changing the property manager, but he was concerned because he might get a manager that was worse. And I said, well, but what happens if you get one that's better? And speaking of bad, why do you not like this one? She goes, well, she keeps charging me for things that aren't on the property. And I said, well, how do you know? Give me an example. He said, well, here's an example. She gave me a bill because they replaced a sliding glass door on the property. I said, okay, what's the problem with that? He goes, we don't have any sliding glass doors. So that was pretty obvious that she was basically charging him for a repair on a different property.
Oh, wow.
Well, he didn't find this out until he fired her because he was trying to get her to, he wanted to expand in Abilene. So he wanted her to go out and find out, tell him who the owners were of these other surrounding apartment buildings because he wanted to start making them offers. And she came back at one point and said, oh, yeah, well, either she couldn't figure out who owned it or she contacted them. They weren't interested in selling. He's like, okay, that's fine. Well, then finally 2 years in, he gets upset with her, gets rid of her, brings in somebody new, goes to the new manager. By the way, bringing in the new manager, he increased his revenue $5,000 a month within just a few months of the new manager coming on board.
Wow.
That's how much a good manager will actually save you. As a matter of fact, about 2 years ago, he had bought another new property down in Abilene, and he was so happy with her performance that he actually gifted her 3% ownership in the property to thank her for helping him find properties, plus doing a great job managing the properties. But anyway, he goes to this new manager and he says, hey, I've been trying to contact these managers around the area to see if they want to sell. Can you tell me or go out and find out who owns them? And she goes, oh, well, I already know who owns them. And he's like, really? Who? He goes, your old manager. Her and her husband own all the properties.
Wow.
Like, that now explains why he was getting these charges for the sliding glass doors, because she was putting, and why their income went up $5,000 a month, because she was putting a lot of her repairs for her properties on his budget.
Wow. Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah.
And I can imagine too that they're essentially a competitor too. I mean, they're probably going to give preference to their properties over yours too. So
yeah,
that's be pros and cons of that.
That's a possibility that you need to take into consideration. So,
yeah.
But that the new manager, actually, she also owns some of her own properties, and she's been great. He loves her, and that's why he gifted her 3%.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And so with your property manager, then what are some red flags that you would want to watch out for, and maybe might give you some indication it's time to find someone else?
Yeah. Red flag number one is that you're getting complaints from the residents. If you do the annual polls with your residents about how the property manager is taking care of them, how they're handling complaints, how quickly are they getting repairs done, things like that. Excuse me. Some of those things are out of their control, especially if they're hiring contractors, because sometimes the contractors are just busy and they can't get out there any faster. But other times it is in their control. You want to make sure that they care about the property and that they're taking care of the property, and that you see your income, right? Again, what are you going to do to help me increase the value of the property? A good property manager is proactive. They don't come to you, or you don't go to them and say, hey, we think we should raise the rent. They should be coming to you and saying, hey, we've done what's called a lease survey or a rental survey, and we've gone out and surveyed all the other surrounding competitive properties, and we believe you can raise the rent X amount of dollars a month because of the survey that we did. That's what a good property manager should do. We think we should change from this service provider to that service provider because we believe we're going to help save you an extra 20% a year on expenses. That's what a good property manager does.
Yeah.
You constantly have to go to your manager and say, hey, can you go do a rental survey? And of course, that's one of the questions you ask them before you hire them is, can you provide me with a rental survey? And a lot of my students will say, well, you know what? Well, why would a manager give me a rental survey when I haven't hired them yet? It's easy. They want you to hire them, and that's why they're going to give you the rental survey. But they should be coming to you with that rental survey, right? You shouldn't have to keep going to them and prodding them to give you the rental survey. They should automatically be giving it to you at least once a year, if not twice a year. As a matter of fact, I've got a student here in Denver who actually is a property manager. And of course, she manages A-class properties. She does a rental survey every month for her owners. every single month. She goes into her software because the way the software is set up, she can actually go out and check competitive properties right through her software and come back and say, hey, this is what the average is in the area. You should raise the rent $25, $30, $50, $100 a month.
So if you're not getting those things, then it's bad
time to
sign.
start looking for somebody else.
Okay. All right. Now maybe we can move into increasing profitability. So taking, a property that you have and maybe decreasing expenses, increasing income. What are some things, let's say with decreasing expenses, what are some ways that you might do that?
Some of the ways you can do that would depend on what's happening at your particular area. I'm actually a very big proponent of putting in better quality flooring. A lot of people don't think about it because they look at the flooring that's in the property right now, and they could potentially recarpet an entire apartment unit for $500 to $1,000. I try and get them to put in a better quality of flooring, like vinyl plank or ceramic tile or something like that. And they'll look at that and they'll go, well, yeah, but that's instead of $1,000, that's $1,500 to do the vinyl plank flooring. And I'll say, you know what? You're right. But guess what? In 2 to 4 years, depending on how the residents take care of that crappy, it's actually called renter grade carpet for a reason, right? In 2 to 4 years, you're going to have to replace that again for another $1,000. When do you think you're going to have to replace your vinyl plank flooring again? So one of the things that I do to decrease the overall expenses is to actually increase how much I'm spending on the property now to upgrade certain things, to upgrade things like the flooring, even putting in a better quality paint. It may not seem like a whole lot, but there's a big difference between putting in crappy low-grade paint that you can't just, after a while, if you go in and just kind of touch it up, it's going to show. You're going to see spots all over the wall. So how do you get rid of that? You have to paint the whole thing. But if you put in a better quality of paint, like a semi-gloss or an eggshell or something like that, you can literally go in and just have somebody wipe down the wall and get rid of some of the stuff that's on it and not have to worry about repainting it. Same thing with the exteriors. There's something you could do to the exterior, or if you do have to replace the roof, can you upgrade the roof to something that's going to last a little bit longer, even though it's going to cost you more now? Is it going to A, save you more money in the long run? And B, is it going to increase the value of the property? So somebody new coming in that wants to buy it from you is looking around like, wow, this thing is great. You've already done the vinyl plank. You've already put on X type of roof. You've already put on this kind of siding. There's nothing for me to do with it. It's already taken care of. So that's the biggest thing is, or one of the biggest things is actually spending more. I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive, right? How do you lower your expenses? Spend more money.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. But the other thing we look at too is, again, with contractors, if we have a painter, if we have a plumber, if we have an electrician, who are we using and how much are they charging? Is there somebody else out there that we can maybe bring in on a trial and give them the opportunity to do some work for us to maybe get the same work or better work for less money? You can always look at your taxes. You can always look at doing what's called a protest your taxes, right? Your property taxes. It might cost you a little bit, but you're going to save that if you can get your property taxes lowered. Even things like water bills. Are there water saving devices that you can put on the faucets? So can you put in low flow toilets? One of the things that we did on one of our properties is we got the residents to pay for their own water. We actually went in and sub-metered every single unit, and now they just pay they get a separate water bill and they pay for exactly what they're using. That was the best thing that we ever did. It cost us about $16,000 to do 74 units. And we got that money back within, I think it was 16 months, because we no longer had to worry about paying the water bill. And so it was a great way to lower our expenses. The opposite side, you're probably going to ask next, how do you increase the revenue? Well, one of the ways we increased the revenue, right, was we got the residents to pay for their own water. We also, of course, do the rental survey at least once, if not twice a year, just to see what's going on in the rental market, to see if we can raise the rent. Can we put laundry equipment on the property? Do we have laundry with a service provider where they take a huge chunk of the profit? If that's the case, how do we get rid of them and go get our own equipment? So instead of getting 40% of the quarters, we can get 100% of the quarters. And of course, if you're putting in new equipment, You shouldn't have to worry about a lot of maintenance and repairs. If the equipment's 5-10 years old, it's constantly breaking down. So that's an issue. Anything else that we can do? Another thing we've done are what are called RUBS systems, ratio utility billback systems, where unlike the water on that one property where we could actually charge them or bill them for the exact amount they were using, you might have to prorate it on a ratio, and usually the square foot of their unit compared to the square feet of the entire complex. And they might have to pay that portion of their electricity or their water or their gas or any number of things. We started charging for pets, right? A lot of people don't charge for pets. We charge a non-refundable fee when they move in, plus we charge pet rent. So they pay anywhere from $10 to $20 to $30 per pet per month if they want to have little Fluffy with them.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And so with that RUB system, does that fluctuate from month to month? Is it based on the actual usage and it just kind of divided up?
Yeah, the best way to do it is to actually do it as I mentioned, is it's the square foot of their unit divided by the square foot of the entire complex. And then what you do is you get a percentage. And then based on that percentage, every month you have a spreadsheet set up. So every month when the electric bill comes in, you just put in the amount of the electric bill and it automatically goes down. It goes, here's how much everybody owes. And then your property manager gives them a bill in the middle of the month that says, hey, when your rent is paid on the first of the month, you need to add $30.82 because that was your portion of the electricity. And it's all written in the lease. So, right, you can't just start charging them for it. It has to be in the lease so that they know they're going to be paying for it.
Yeah.
But it's pretty simple to do it at that point. We've had other properties where we charged a flat fee. I do not recommend that. We did that on one of our properties with water. We started charging $10 a month for 1 bedrooms and $20 a month for 2 bedrooms. And it's what I call the buffet effect. Within 3 months, our water bill doubled.
Oh, wow.
And I think it was because the resident said, well, hey, if you're going to start charging me for it, I'm going to start using it.
Yeah.
And the water bill just went through the roof. On the other property where we had another partner of mine had a different property where he was able to meter them and everybody's now paying for exactly what they're using. The water bill actually cut in half within 3 months.
Yeah.
So, huge difference.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe briefly, we could talk about when to fire your property manager. We talked about some red flags, things to look out for. Like, at what point would you say, okay, it's enough of this, time to get somebody else?
Yeah, in some cases, it's pretty easy. Like the guy I was telling you about in Pennsylvania, when he just said, budget, what budget? We just tell you how much to send us. The breaking point, of course, we had already started looking for another manager. Matter of fact, I got off the phone with him and the student that was in charge of the project and immediately picked up the phone, called the student, said, you need to find a replacement. He goes, yeah, I know. And we immediately started looking for a replacement property manager, but he couldn't find one within a reasonable time. And then about a month later is when he spent $4,000 to rehab a 1-bedroom property that was maybe 550 square feet. And it was just ridiculous. And we asked him, well, what did you actually spend the money on? Well, we did upgraded flooring and upgraded paint. Well, the upgraded flooring was still carpeting. That was an easy decision. What's not as easy is like the student in Abilene who didn't really realize that he was being overcharged for a lot of repairs. He was still making some pretty good money and he was still happy. But what really caught his eye was the fact that the manager was screwing up and charging him for things that he knew were not on his property. Mm-hmm. And after that happened a few times, that's when he started saying, this is really driving me nuts. She's still doing it. I'm finding these errors. I want to make a change, but I'm not sure I want to make a change because what if I get somebody worse? What if you get somebody better? So he made the change, boom, his income went up, and then it was plain as day, the issues that you were having. So again, it comes down to, do you get a good feel from the manager? Are they being proactive? Are they coming to you with ideas? Again, it comes down to, how are you going to make me and my investors more money on this property, both cash flow and equity, if we hire you to take on this property? And they need to prove it again and again. Hey, we think you should raise the rent. We think you can lower expenses over here. We found a new contractor that instead of charging $100 a square foot for vinyl plank flooring, they only charge $80. We'd like to give them a try on this next unit to see how they do. It's like, go for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome.
Those are the types of things a good manager will do for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So do you have any final points you'd like to share about managing the property, or anything that we didn't cover here?
Whew, I don't know. We covered a ton of stuff.
Yeah. Or any stories,
Yeah.
good or bad stories about management that might be useful for our listeners?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing I can pass on is don't be afraid to make a change. Right? Because just like the one student, he's like, well, what if I get somebody who's worse? Well, what if you get somebody who's better? You'll never know unless you actually take action. If you're not comfortable, if you're not happy, if you don't think they're doing a good job, they're probably not. So don't be afraid to make a change. Now, you do need to make sure you read your contract with them. Sometimes if you can fire them for cause, like the cause that we had with the one guy who spent $4,000 when he was only allowed to spend $3,500 total, that was pretty easy. We fired him for cause. He was done. He was gone. But if you just have an uneasy feeling or you want to try somebody new, then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to wait for your contract to terminate, and then, of course, give them the proper notice, and then have somebody else ready to move into their space. I think I've actually covered a lot of the bad sides and the good sides, right, already. So I don't know if I have necessarily any more horror stories that I can share with you.
No, those were
I
good.
kind of covered that throughout the podcast.
Yeah, well, good. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, those are powerful, because kind of see what happens when you have a good manager versus a bad manager, the world of difference that it can make. So appreciate that.
Again, they will make or break you very, very quickly. So don't be afraid to make a change and get rid of the manager if you don't think they're doing a good job. And sure, if you find out that the next person you hire isn't doing as good of a job as the first one, then go to a third one, or you can always go back to the first one.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Well, thanks so much for sharing all that today. It was very, very valuable information. I think our audience is really going to benefit from that. Yeah. And what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you and learn more about you and what you do?
Thanks for asking. They can find me on the internet. I'm at successclasses.com or apartmentmentors.com. Either one, they both point to the same place right now, but successclasses.com. They can email me, Anthony@successclasses.com. And, we'd love to have them come out for some training. I do lots of different training, 1-day workshops, 4-day boot camps. So I love teaching people how to do this kind of stuff. And, this is all about acquisition. It's not just about after the fact, right? The property management, what we're talking about today is after you buy it. Well, how do you get to that point? So if people want to learn more about that, they can come check me out. I'd love to have them.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it. Really valuable insights. And thanks again, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me, Todd. Have a good day.
Today, we talked all about keys to multifamily asset management and the importance of hiring the right property manager. To help you even more, we put together a free resource you can download called The Best Multifamily Asset Management Resources. It includes places to find a property management company, podcast episodes and books about asset management, training videos, software, and more. You can download your copy for free at apartmentinvestorpro.com/asset. Again, that's apartmentinvestorpro.com/asset. That's ASSET. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Apartment Investor Pro podcast. Be sure to subscribe to get the latest episodes. Also, visit our website at apartmentinvestorpro.com and connect with us.